This is lecture number 4 in the building blocks of music theory, and today we're going to discuss melody. So the question arises, what is melody? And we all intuitively know what that is, but let's think about it for a minute. It's a linear succession of musical tones that a listener can perceive as a single entity. So Beethoven's Fifth Symphony starts with a motive that we can perceive has some kind of continuity and some kind of cohesiveness. A phrase might be something like that. Alouette, jonte, alouette, alouette, jonte plus marée. We hear that as one entity because of the way it's constructed and how the intervals are used, the contour and shape of that, and it becomes recognizable and memorable. A melody doesn't have to be memorable, but generally speaking, in Western culture, they are. So things like songs and motives, like I mentioned, and phrases are almost immediately identified as melodies. And what it is really is the simultaneous interaction of two axes of music. Pitch, which is the up and down version of those axes, change in frequency from low to high and high to low. And then, of course, time, which comes about because of rhythm. Rhythm is nothing more than events that take place over a continuum of time. So what's really important about this is we have some essential components. So melodies are made of steps, skips, and leaps, and scale fragments. And it's a succession of notes, usually with, like I said, a sense of phrase and harmonic direction, which we'll go into later. But if you listen to this, listen to the steps. So each of these steps, from the C, D, A, B, and G, A, those are melodic movements by seconds. And that's pretty much the most common form of melodic movement. Then, skips. And skips are considered melodic movement by thirds. And then finally, leaps. And that's melodic movement by fourths or larger intervals. They're very difficult to sing sometimes, but they can also add a lot of variety and interest in a sound depending on how they're used. The other one that we want to look at is how the succession happens. So look at this next example and you'll see it starts with a leap, then it moves by step, and then there's this scale fragment. Now that could be from a mode or it could be from the major scale itself. And in this case, this particular melody kind of outlines the key of C, but listen how it works. Now what's nice about that is that the scale starts on C, ends on C, and uses a construction that the notes are able to lead into that resolution of C. So we get by the use of the leading tone. So you can see that the steps and leaps are the essential components of what makes a melody. Now we have three types, and conjunct, disjunct, and then the combined. So listen to these three melodies. Now that's extremely conjunct in the sense it's all connected with stepwise motion. The next one, that is disjunct. In other words, it's using skips and leaps instead of stepwise motion. But it's pretty obvious that most melodies are a combination of this. Now, sequences, which are transitional periods, oftentimes are very stepwise or are very disjunct by their very nature. But listen to this melody once again. So you can see that it has at the very beginning 3 stepwise motions, then a skip, stepwise down, leap, and after the leap, it goes stepwise in the opposite direction. We're going to discuss that in a moment. And it comes back down, moves up, and then it skips down to the fifth note of the scale, and then ascends all the way to C through scalar motion. So the types of melodies are absolutely crucial in understanding how music is constructed. And so I like to look at the architecture of melodies. In other words, what structures, besides just intervals, help give us this sense of melody? So if you look at this one, in this whole page, on the right side, we have contour. So in the arch, for instance, on the arch form, that contour looks like an arch. It starts on a low pitch and works its way up gradually to a high point and then comes back down. The inverted arch would be just the opposite. Instead of going up, it goes down. And so on, back up to the top. Now that's very important in our understanding how the architecture helps give us direction in music. So we're going to use this extensively. Then we have something called simple ascent. So the beginning of Anchors Away is a simple ascent. And then it continues up and then comes back down to 5-1. So the interesting thing about that particular melody is it's mostly ascending at the beginning. Now a simple descent would be something like this. So Joy to the World actually is the C major scale, in this key of course, descending by all scale steps right down from tonic to tonic. That would be known as a simple descent. Something that's very, very common is a wave effect. I added a little ornament, but you notice how it rises and then falls, and rises and falls. Wave effect can be very, very useful in things like motets and like fugues, and in vocal and instrumental music. We see them all over the place. And the reason for that is that they can tend to hover over certain pitches in each one of the waves and give us this sense of unity and tightness in the music. Then the last one is called a pivotal pattern, and this is very typical in folk songs. So for instance, so you can see I have an asterisk over each one of the C's because C is being prolonged. So get used to that term because we're going to have many instances of prolongation. It might be one note, it might be a chord that gets prolonged over a rhythmic axis. So in this case, it's pivotal because it pivots around C. And notice that it comes back to C every time. C, repeat, 7-1 or 7-8. And so that, you can see why that's probably used in folk music a lot, because there are pitches that are memorable and real easy to get back to. Now melodic motion, we've talked about that. Conjunct is stepwise. Disjunct is thirds, jumps, fourths are bigger, leaps and jumps. And then we have consonant ones and dissonant ones. This slide shows us consonant skips and leaps and dissonant skips and leaps. So here's the minor third. Minor 6, major 6, perfect octave. Now the augmented second sounds like a minor third, but we never want to write that unless it were to go to an E. But we would consider that dissonant by notation, even though it sounds consonant. Tritone is very important. That's a very dissonant skip, and it would normally resolve up a step. The diminished fifth is the same idea, but we would write in that G flat would probably come down to an F. less common. Minor seventh would probably come back and resolve to the A. And then the major seventh could go to the A, or it actually, this is one of the exceptions, because it's the leading tone, it could resolve up. But we need to know the difference between those kinds of skips and leaps. Then we have something called the law of recovery. And so after a large leap, what we want to do is follow that large leap by a stepwise motion in the opposite direction. So it's very satisfying. So instead of this going and then keeping the ascension going, that's very hard to sing. But that makes for a really beautiful contour. And so this law of recovery is something we're going to use in species counterpoint. Listen. That's the second bar. Ooh, that's jumping a ninth. The ninth comes back to the octave. Gives a nice sense of closure. Now the major seventh can do that, but because it's the leading tone once again, it can be one of the exceptions to law of recovery. And then finally, up a tenth, which is about as wide as we want to get in a melody. It comes back to the second scale degree, the D, and it's really satisfying. So there are some consecutive leaps, or jumps as they're sometimes called, that are okay to use. When we arpeggiate something, we're taking a chord and we're breaking it up. So it gives us this. So there we have consecutive leaps and skips and arpeggios, and that's fine. But we want to avoid consecutive fourths, fifths, or larger intervals. It's really hard to sing that. Now, have composers used those? Of course they have. But when we're learning to write a melody initially, we're going to avoid that. Not only is it hard to sing, it's hard to resolve, and it's hard to write other voices against that. So one of the single most important things, and we've talked about this in class, but I want to revisit this, is scales and the gravity of the tonic. So in the 18th and 19th centuries, and really mostly through the 20th century, we have mostly major and minor tonalities and the gravity of the tonic. So you can see in this graph, I have a C major scale. And we've talked about this in class. 2 wants to go to 1. 4 wants to go to 3. 6 wants to go to 5. 7 wants to go to 8. Well, what would happen if I played all of the black notes that look like quarter notes, 2, 4, 6, and 7 together? They all want to move to the tonic triad, and it sounds like this. That's where we get the gravity of the tonic. All other chords that we can create, successions of notes, simultaneous harmonic notes in a tonal piece of music, are subordinate to the tonic. And that's where we get the term key. And all of those reinforce the gravity of the tonic. Which leads us to something called a cadence. A cadence comes from cadentia in Latin, which means to fall or falling. It's where we get cadaver. We get really cool words that come from that idea. Footfall is a cadence that a marching band might use. And a cadence is a melodic or harmonic configuration that creates a sense of resolution or finality. I'll play a couple for you in a moment. A harmonic cadence is a progression of at least 2 chords that conclude a phrase, a section, or a piece of music. A rhythmic cadence is a characteristic rhythmic pattern that indicates the end of a phrase. It usually means something slows down to a point of finality or speeds up and ends abruptly. So we can have melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic cadences. So let's look at a couple of examples of what's known as a weak or strong cadence, and it depends on its sense of finality in the tonality we're writing in. So cadences are really strong indicators of the tonic or central pitch of a passage or piece. So you look at this melodic piece. That's a very strong melodic cadence. And the reason it's strong is all of the notes are leading to C. And look at the end. It has the fifth, which is the dominant note, followed by the seventh, which is the leading tone, to the tonic. You can't get much stronger than that. Now that's not a cadence because it doesn't sound like it's stopping it on 2. Then we come back to the fifth note. That's a very strong melodic cadence. A weak one would be if it ended on a different note. Now that doesn't sound like it's ending. It sounds like something needs to follow it, and we would call that a weak cadence if the music paused there. In harmonic rhythm, I have the 4 chord followed by the 5/7 chord in inversion. That's very strong, it's very conclusive, and so much of our tonal music ends with this. We call the first chord a predominant chord, followed by the dominant chord, which is built off the 5th scale degree, followed by the tonic chord. Now listen to this next one. This next one, you'll see it has a sharp in it. This is going to give us what's called a half cadence. It's not conclusive. As a matter of fact, what it does, it keeps the music wanting to move forward. So it signals that motion. So if I play, I go to the minor chord, back to the 1 chord, and then I do this. Then what I have is that ends on the 5 chord, not the 1 chord. And it pauses rhythmically. It's a cadence because it pauses, but it's weak. That means it's not strong by closing things off. It's actually propelling things forward. The other consideration for a melody is its range. So we don't want to exceed the total ambitus of a 12th. Ambitus means the lowest to the highest notes in a melody. The range of that melody means whether it is high or whether it's low, but the ambitus is very specific about what the lowest note is and the highest note is. So listen to this 10th. Boy, and I use law of recovery. If I didn't, and that's really hard to sing at 10th. So the ambitus of a 12th. You want to make sure that your melody doesn't go any further outside that compass of that ambitus. And then when you're moving in the same direction, don't expose unstable intervals. Now what we mean by expose them is put them on very strong parts of the measure. Listen to this. So everything just moves in the same direction. We could use some law of recovery. So I'm going to make sure I do that by reworking it. Let me play that again. So that rework allowed me to use the law of recovery, and you're allowed to use not only a second with law of recovery, but a third. At least a second or a third. But it surrounded that C by the 2nd scale degree and the 7th scale degree. It's much more satisfying. So what we mean by that is if you have a dissonant interval, we have to really figure out how we want to use that dissonant interval so it doesn't interrupt the flow of the music. And then meter, when you work on your upcoming project, make sure you use traditional meters and time signatures only, just to start off with. But no matter what the meter is, the first beat of each bar is to be stressed. Now, we just learn how to do that initially, and then we can vary that. So in rhythm, long durations are on strong beats, short are usually on weak beats. D, da, da, D, da, da, D, da, da, when we're first learning how to do this. And keep the number of rhythmic patterns to a minimum for consistency. So you don't want to all of a sudden throw in 9 different rhythmic patterns. You'll have no continuity in the melody you write. And if you have triplets or dotted rhythms or whatever, if you have one, have it at least twice. Otherwise, it sounds like they don't sound dulcetory. In other words, they don't fit. And it's like, why is that in there? So I have accents on this melody to show how it goes long, short. So that melody is very strong. It uses 3/4 time, has a pickup note, but you'll notice that the long notes are on the strong beats. Strong beats are the downbeats of the measures. And then for possible beginnings, use an introductory motive. So come up with something, or an initial theme comprised of more than one motive in an antecedent-consequent relationship. And that simply means question-answer. So you could have something like, and what that was, the introductory motive, is that. Very short. A motive is just 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 notes, but it's very short. And notice the rhythm repeated. Now the contour is shifted. And then the rhythm is the same. So you can develop a motive or a theme with repetition or a sequence. A sequence simply means repeating it over and over again rhythmically on different notes. Variation, you can start changing it slightly, and then have contrast or new content. And I'll give you lots of practice on that and several handouts to show you how to do that. And then we want to conclude with a strong cadence, either a 5/1 or a 5/1 in minor and all the derivatives. Now with one voice, because that would be this in harmonically. But with one voice, it means 7/1, 2/1, or 5/1 in either direction. So the example here, once again, ends with a 5/1 in major. Five, 1. That makes it a melodic cadence. In minor, it's kind of cool. I love minor because it gives us more colors to play with. And finally, the minor scale rules. We'll get into this more later, but I just want to introduce it to you now. When we raise the 7th scale degree when it moves to the tonic, this is where we get melodic minor and those sorts of things. So for instance, in A minor, that's where melodic minor comes from. Notice I raised the 6th and 7th scale degrees when I was moving from the 5th scale degree to the 8th. I'll do that again. Now I'm going to lower them to 5. And then I raise them again, the 6th and 7th scale degrees, which would normally be F and G, become F sharp and G sharp. That's where we get melodic minor, where we get harmonic minor. It's to aid in the direction of the music going home to the tonic. Now you'll see some other indications underneath those. Don't worry about those. You're going to learn those in the next lecture, what a 1 chord is and a 5 chord, and what a PD, what a predominant is and a dominant, that sort of thing. Now it's just consider the direction that your melody is moving. You'll notice this is a wave-shaped melody with some really cool little leaps, and when the leaps happen, there's law of recovery. So the general rules for your first composition project, melody construction, is give emphasis to the tonic. So in this example, watch this. So that's a sequence. In other words, notice that the scale tones, 1, 1, 3, and 4 are all on strong beats. The strong beats in 4/4 time are 1 and 3. And what's really interesting is sequence means it repeats, but with different notes, repeats rhythmically with different notes. And then the ending, it's 1, sub, 1. It really makes it a strong melody. And so you shape the melody around what's known as structural pitches. So 1, 3, and 5 are structural pitches in the key of C. So build it around those pitches. Don't shape the melody around unstable pitches. Now this is in C, but listen how weird it sounds. Play it again. It kind of tends to wander all over the place. We can't tell if we're in D minor, whether it's a modal piece, is this in Dorian mode. But because it didn't emphasize the stable pitches, 1, 3, and 5, it kind of floats and doesn't have any real sense of direction. Always resolve the leading tone, scale degree 7, upward to the tonic quickly. So listen to this. You don't want to do this. Wow, that just sounds like something was added that was really weird. But I could take that same second phrase and do this. Because I kind of surrounded the tonic by the 7th scale degree, the 2nd scale degree. Those are members of what's known as the 5 chord. The triad built off the 5th scale degree. And in minor, that's really cool. I'm still, when I go to the tonic, I'm going to raise it up so it's a half step away from the tonic. Well, that's the basic idea for constructing melodies. It's a lot of stuff, but we're going to do several projects that will help you understand how that works. And then from here, we move to counterpoint, and it gets really exciting. So I hope you enjoyed this, and the PowerPoint's on here. The PowerPoint is on Canvas for you to look at. So we'll see you in class.